Wait for it. Hey, we're live. Good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's season 2, episode 60. I am Josh Hayes, as always, here with my co-host Scott Moon. And today, the best-selling author of the Honor Harrington and Safehold series, David Weber, joins the show. He's been writing for well over 20 years. That's a joke from yesterday's sound check. And today, he joins us to talk about his writing journey. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks. How are you?
I am fantastic, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to come and drink coffee with us and hang out.
You are welcome.
We talked about huge coffee cups before the show, and Scott and I love to chug coffee on. Oh yes, yes, yeah. Huge.
I don't have cups as big as yours, Josh. I usually have like 3 coffee cups. And then if you watch the shows carefully, you'll see me with a blue cup, and then later I'll have a red cup, and then
okay. So you go with small cups, so you can convince people you're actually drinking more than you are.
Right. It's like shots. Line them up.
I understand.
I've actually also got 2 cups, but one's to drink out of and one's to keep it warm. So I don't have a coffee pot next to my desk like you. So
well, it's like I told you. You know, anybody who reads the Honor Harrington books, when they get to Honor, should recognize a character created by a recovering addict who then fell off the wagon. I'm just saying. You know,
we got our first comment from the live chat says, "Wait, doesn't the David Weber drink hot chocolate?"
That's what I drank before I fell off the wagon.
Yes, that's right. So I'm like I said, I'm sure there's not a whole lot of people that don't know who you are and the books that you write, but if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
Okay. I do, like you said, the Honor Harrington and the Safehold books. The last time I counted, I think I have 6 ongoing series, and I have a lot of people are saying, why don't you finish my series? And then I say, okay, which one shouldn't I write on while I do yours? And everybody's saying, no, not that one, you know. So, I sold the first novel in 1989 to Baen Books. It was a collaboration. You mentioned you want to talk about collaborations.
Yes.
With Steve White, which was actually based on a war game design that I'd done. I was kind of off and running from there. I think I'd sold 4 before the first one ever was published, including both of the Mutineer's Moon books, the 2 initial books there, and the Apocalypse Troll. So all 4 of those had been sold to Baen before Insurrection came out. And then they lost the Apocalypse Troll for like 10 years. Yeah. No, literally, I am not kidding you. I got a call from Marla Ainspan at Baen and said, David, you're going to think this is really funny, but I found a contract from 1991 that you never filled. And I said, excuse me? And she said, it's for something called the Apocalypse Troll. And I said, Marla, that contract was written after the book had been delivered. She said, really? I said, yes. And I've revised it twice since then. And she said, why? And I said, well, the Berlin Wall fell. So things happened. So she said, so when people say, you know, reads like early David Weber, they're right. I got started in writing actually probably in the 5th grade. That's when I started writing really execrable poetry. I became advertising copywriter when I was 17. And I've supported myself writing one way or another ever since. Well, that and typesetting and stuff like that there. But I've written just about everything. I've written TV and radio spots. I've written newspaper. I've written magazine articles. I've done studies on I've been the writer on studies on barriers to housing for HUD.
Nice.
There's nothing that I haven't written one way or another. So pushing words around comes natural to me.
I'm curious to how you got into copyright or advertising writing at 17.
Well, it helps to have a mother who never really paid too much attention to that. Wait, you're a woman, you can't do that. And build your own small ad agency in South Carolina in the 1970s. There's a reason why I am comfortable with strong, competent female characters in my books. I am the son of one, and I'm married to one, and they are much more interesting people than people who aren't strong and competent.
Right.
It just sounds like they're just everywhere. They're just all throughout your life.
Well,
And
okay, Sharon tells me that, Sharon being the one I'm married to, tells me that my attitude towards women and so forth is not universal, blah, 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 and I've seen it when her mom was in the hospital with a stroke, and this was before we were actually married. The neurologist came out and he was busy explaining to me what her mother's condition was. And I said to him, okay, this is his daughter over here. And he more or less said, hi, pleased to meet you. And then went back to describing it to me.
yeah.
Okay. And if I had been, and I kept trying to push it back over there, and he kept saying, yes, yes, and then coming back over here. He was an older guy, but not that much older. And so, yeah, I can understand intellectually where Sharon is coming from when she says, there are people out there who are going to pat you on your head because you're female and say, there, go do your thing.
We talked about this.
I just don't understand how they do that.
Right.
Yeah. We talked about this during the pre-show, and I'm kind of similar. As I was raised around very strong women growing up, including my mother and all of her friends and stuff like that. So yeah, it catches me off guard the same way. But I don't know, Josh, is this time for us to talk about that topic or
Yeah, no, I think that it's interesting because you mentioned before the show being the first post-feminist sci-fi writer with Harrington.
I didn't say that. Somebody reviewing one of my books said it, and I was sitting there trying to figure out what the heck she was talking about. I mean, I didn't even think of myself as a feminist science fiction writer, much less a post-feminist science fiction writer.
Did the experience in that hospital or more experiences that you've seen with your mom and other women, did that lead you to create Honor Harrington purposefully, or?
Oh, no. It never occurred to me when I was creating the character Honor Harrington that Honor Harrington was going to be anything but female. I mean, just when I sat down to write up my little character sketch, the first sentence is Honor Harrington is a female Eurasian starship captain. Bang, in the tech Bible. And that was just, and it wasn't like, okay, I need to have a female character. It's not I think that science fiction has to be careful when it gets into the social commentary role.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that in near future science fiction, it's the perfect venue because you can extrapolate from where you are right this minute to where you are in 30 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years. When you get beyond that century or so limit, it gets a little iffier. And when you get out to the periods that I write, which are like, 1,000 years in the future or whatever, you have to be really careful because if your characters are still facing the same barriers 1,000 years from now, you are really, really denigrating women or minorities or whatever by assuming they'll put up with it for another millennium.
Right.
Okay. I've told people that my opinion is that by Honor Harrington's time, the question of gender equality will have all the burning significance to the people of her time that Pharaoh's policy towards the Hittites has to us.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a done deal.
Right.
Because, and one of the reasons I feel that way is any society that doesn't recognize the necessity of female equality, okay, is writing off 50% of its potential doctors, its potential scientists, its potential good brains, because 50% of the human race is female. Actually, a little more because we are more expendable than they are. But any society that says we're not going to use our human capital, okay, they're not reinvesting. And eventually, unless they are sufficiently intolerant to nuke everybody else in the vicinity, okay, they're going to get left behind by the societies that are willing to make that investment. I have twin 16-year-old daughters. They'll be 16 in October, adopted from Cambodia. And I have a son who will be 15 in December. and who has his mom's red hair and his dad's brown eyes, and someday she will forgive me for that. But I got to tell you, there is no way in the world I want to get in either of those girls' ways when they decide what they want to do, and that's exactly the way their mom and I wanted them to be.
Good, very good.
In your books, we were talking about in the pre-show too, how it's handled is that it's very natural. You know, there's not a lot of, you know, it doesn't feel like this is really an issue. You just wrote the stories.
Yeah, it goes back to that feeling of Pharaoh and the Hittites. In a way, far future science fiction is the perfect venue for social science fiction, because in the Honorverse, to me, it's a given who's going to win that particular struggle, who's already won it. I have a friend who's black who had read like the first 4 Honor Harrington books, and he called me on the phone. And he said, "The Queen of Manticore is black." I said, "Yeah."
Why not?
He says, "No, you don't understand. The Queen of Manticore is black." And I said, "Chuck, I wrote the book. I know she's black." And he says, "But nobody ever talks about it." And I said, "That's what they're saying about it.
Right.
Is that nobody ever talks about it."
Right. It's not an issue in 1,000 years in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, Eric Flint and I touched on it a little bit in one of the collaborations when his character Webb du Havel is talking about genetic slavery with folks on Manticore. And he says, "Oh yeah, 2,000 years ago, Queen Elizabeth would have been a house slave, probably having to sleep with her master every night, kind of thing." And they're going, "Oh no, that's ridiculous. You couldn't possibly make somebody a slave, think of them as less than somebody else just because of the color of their skin." And in that venue, then it becomes a really good avenue for commenting on our society. Right. Because ultimately all science fiction is a transfer of our society's perspective to another time and place.
Which kind of leads into J.R. Hanley's question a little bit. He asks, you don't buy into the belief that you should write societies that are comfortable to the modern reader, hence why writing science fiction that closely mirrors today.
I'm a historian by training. Okay, I don't know if that may show occasionally in the books. And my area of specialization was military and diplomatic history. My master's thesis was on had a title that comes trippingly from the tongue: Anglo-American Relations and the Suppression of the Atlantic Slave Trade. And
say that 3 times real fast.
Yeah, just like that. I just finished the new Honor Harrington novel last night. Well, actually, I finished the raw rough draft, and I need to go back and edit before it's going to be in a submitted stage. But Honor actually came up with a line that I really, really liked, thinking about where they are going to be post the war with the Solarian League. It's got some little rebuilding and reorganizing to do. And she's saying, well, they won't make the mistakes they made before, but that just means they'll find mistakes of their own to make, because human beings make 2 things: tools and mistakes. Okay.
That's great.
And that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, generally, unless they're like really big mistakes, we get a chance to learn from them. And then as long as we remember that we made that one, we don't make it again. But we forget. Right. Okay. And human beings, I think, what I do write about are human beings. And until we are no longer something that a 21st century reader would recognize, we're going to make the same kinds of mistakes, right, given the same kinds of opportunities to make them. Okay. So on the one hand, some people would call me a pessimist. I prefer to call myself a realist in that respect. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I believe that we always start from the platform the previous generation gave us. And there are some mistakes that we are not willing to make or to tolerate a second time around.
Right.
So we have a building base as long as we don't manage to blow it out from under ourselves. And we don't have to do it in a nuclear war. I mean, we can do it by a breakdown of civil society. We can do it by having people turn on each other in an extra political framework. You know, it can be done. It happened in Italy in the 1920s. It happened in Germany in the 1930s.
Right.
And one of the things, Upton Sinclair wrote a book in the 40s called "It Can't Happen Here."
Famous last words.
Well, no, but it was a novel specifically dedicated to proving that it could, if you see what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that science fiction, I think, can and should do. Okay. I think of science fiction as serving the same function in a technological society that fairy tales served in a pre-technic society. They're cautionary tales. Ooh, look out for the nanotech. Okay.
Right.
They're inspirational tales. Okay, here's the hero standing on the bridge holding it while everybody retreats. They're teaching tales, and they're tales that try to explain things in terms that the mental tools of the society they were told to can understand and grasp. So instead of talking about gods and demons and elves and dwarves, we talk about scientists and cyborgs and AIs and starships. But we're still serving the same function for our society.
What I think
but also hopefully entertaining while we do it.
Yeah.
What I think is really entertaining about the main storyline, or it was the main story on one point, and then it finished. It was the Haven storyline where you have their way of life and how they are expected to keep their citizens happy and fed and all that, and their way of life directly affects everyone else's that's not a Havenite, and of course that starts the war. And but I love the fact that you were able to, on both sides of the line, create sympathetic characters and people that you just couldn't stand. I mean, you have what's his name, Theismann, who's one of my favorite characters. You have Foraker, who did amazing work. Then you had who's the guy that started everything? It's losing my. I can't. think of his
Rob Pierre.
Yes, Rob Pierre.
Rob S. Pierre, chairman of the Committee of Public Safety.
Chairman, yes, right. That's right. And then on the other side, you have, in the very first book, you have an admiral that's just out to get honor just because of who she is. And I really enjoyed reading those different characters on both sides of the line.
Well, okay, there are good guys and bad guys on both sides of any conflict. Whether it's a military conflict or a political dispute or whatever. Now there are some where it's harder to find a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I, for example, would have a really hard time finding a good guy in the KKK. On the other hand, I would have a hard time finding somebody I want to sit down and drink coffee with in the Antifa. Okay. I mean, I'm not really, neither one of them are high on my list of, hey, bud, haven't seen ya.
Hang out. Yeah. No, not so much.
But otherwise, okay. Now, sometimes you have to take them in terms of the system that produced them,
right?
As to whether they're good guys or bad guys, because they're limited in a sense to the options their society gives them. They can be rebels against it. They can be quiet subversives, like Alfredo Wu makes Thomas Theismann,
yes,
who he was. And if I ever get around to writing this thing here, you will find out that Alfredo Wu and Javier Giscard, okay, did their midshipman cruise together.
Oh, very nice.
With an officer on the ship who started both of them down the path that led to where they are.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I also did, it's going to be coming out next month in an anthology from Ryan Schmidt, a short story, which is how Eloise Pritchard first became a revolutionary. And
cool.
so there's a lot of kind of that background building stuff going on. But the question of good guys and bad guys on both sides. One thing that I won't write is military splatter porn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think of that as the kind of book where it's like if John Wayne ever killed somebody in a movie, you knew he needed to die. Okay, because John Wayne wouldn't have killed him if he didn't.
Right,
okay?
that guy had it coming.
Absolutely, and unless you see The Man Who Killed Liberty Valance,
Right?
okay,
Right.
But
Great movie.
I thought so. But the Hollywood and fiction has tended to sanitize violence. Now there are certainly cases that cut against that, and I think we're seeing more of them in Hollywood now than we did before. I think Saving Private Ryan was sort of a seminal event in that respect, because in Saving Private Ryan, you have bloodshed that is going to give you nightmares and is going to bring on PTSD flashbacks for people who were actually there. But it's not there to be Saw or just one of the massacre movies. It's part of driving the story and understanding who these characters are.
And it's not done comically like a Kill Bill violence or something like that. It's realistic into the time and the piece that's going on.
Oh, absolutely. But you can, to me, military splatter porn is science fiction or it doesn't have to be science fiction. It can be historical or current fiction, in which if you're a good guy, you're going to make it. Unless you're the obligatory father with the newborn son you haven't met yet.
Right.
Okay. Or the idiot who is foolish enough to say, God, what a beautiful day to be alive at breakfast. Because you know he's gone by lunch. You know. But people who are hit with high velocity weapons die instantly and painlessly. Okay. Right. Or if you're hit and you don't die, it's only a flesh wound. Okay. And you stick your handkerchief into your shirt, roll a cigarette one-handed, light it, then roll out of the side of the building and shoot the bad guy between the eyes, and everybody goes home and it's all good.
That's
pour
right.
some gunpowder in it, burn it through.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, and so I'm not going to write that. Okay. In my books, good people get killed. And the specific reason that Honor Harrington doesn't regenerate is that because I wanted her to pay a physical price beyond just the, oh man, that hurts kind of thing, for who she is and what she does. And so she loses an arm, she loses. And I also did it, to be honest, with malice aforethought, because she is not, excuse me, based on Horatio Hornblower. She's based more on Horatio Nelson and Alexander Cochrane, two other British naval officers. And in fact, when she was supposed to die in the battle that Alistair McKeon died in.
Right.
Okay. And her ship going into that was going to be the Invictus, so that if anybody, was thinking about it, Victory, Invictus, okay, died on the flag bridge. Oh my God, he did it. But there were, I can't say that I was brokenhearted, okay, when I couldn't kill her, partly because I really like the character, okay. But Eric and I had gotten my timeline for the series pulled out of sync in the collaborations we were doing about Victor Kasha and Anton Zilwicki. And so Honor was supposed to die, and then Raoul and Catherine, her kids, were supposed to be in their 30s when the storyline heated up again. So they would be kind of the junior officers coming up. And originally, the Shadow of Saganami was supposed to launch a separate series, which would cover the interim between Honor's death and her children being grown up and coming in, and would build the people who would be the captains and the commanders for her kids to serve under.
Yeah.
And then the timeline got blown out from under me, and I had to rethink. So now the shadow books are just as much a part of the main storyline as the honor books, because I have such a big canvas. I wasn't supposed to have to cover the entire sphere of the galaxy in the storyline. I was supposed to be able to focus on one front, and I can't do that. So, you know, and at the end of this book, I have things pulled back around to about where they were supposed to be when Honor died. Now, whether or not she dies in this book,
spoiler alert,
I'm not going to say.
That's one of the very few times we've actually spoiled something or not spoiled anything, but then given the warning ahead of time. Usually on this show, we spoil things and then we warn about the spoiler right after that.
Yeah, by the way, that was a spoiler. Sorry, reverse retroactive spoiler alerting.
I told you, I'm not telling you whether or not she gets killed here, okay? But what I am telling you is that this book finally does wrap up the storyline that began with Basilisk Station. Okay, cool. Trust me, there will be more novels in the Honorverse.
Vicky Malone Kennedy says, "Don't kill Honor."
Oh, trust me, I've got.
People are going, holy crap!
Yeah, exactly.
in the chat room.
Well, tell them I've already decided what I'm going to do, and they can't change my mind because
her fate is sealed.
I can always move to Montana and raise rabbits under a false name.
Yeah, okay. Can have a backup plan. It's important.
Yeah, yeah. I thought people were going to. I really expected a lot more blowback when I killed Andrew LaFollette. To be honest, but I think people forgave me because of the way he died, what he died doing. But I tried like 4 or 5 times to write that book without killing him, and it didn't work, and I didn't know why. And it wasn't until I turned it in and had a chance to sit back and stop trying to keep him alive that I realized why I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't was that Honor loses 90% of her family in that book, but you've never met them. So for you to really understand the impact that the Yawata strike has on her and why it pushes her the way it pushes her, I had to kill somebody who you knew she cared about so deeply. Okay. And that from that you can kind of, but I didn't know why. I just knew that every time I wrote the scene with him surviving, the book didn't work. I think it works that way for storytellers in general. There's a difference between a writer and a storyteller. And I think that there are a lot more people out there who have the potential to do both, who don't realize it because they feel like, well, I don't have the skills to write. I don't have the training. I don't have the whatever. Writing is, Tony Weisskopf, my publisher at Bain, and I were talking about this, and she came up with a comment that I thought was very accurate. She said, writing is like a physical skill. You acquire it by doing it. I've told people for years, they say, how did you learn to write? And I say, how did you learn to walk? And they look at me and I go, no, I'm not being Zen. Okay, what I'm saying is I don't remember any more than you remember how you learned to walk. But the process is similar. You try to walk, you fall down, you say, oh, well, I need to not lean that way. You get up and you walk a little forward, and even sooner or later you're walking. But when you're writing, what you do is you say, oh God, drag, poof, throw it away and keep going until it starts getting, that's not too bad, and that's the way the process works. And someone can teach you to write, but they can't teach you to be as a storyteller. Storytelling is also a skill that you develop as you use it, but you're either a storyteller or you're not.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of people who have that spark to be a storyteller who don't feel that they have the skills, and maybe don't have the developed skills to write, who could if they had simply been in a slightly different place when it was time to acquire the writing skills.
Yeah, you've all been around those people, like at work or your family. Some people tell a story and you just are hanging every word, and other people, you're like, your first thought is this going to be a long story?
Yeah. Can I? Oh, wait! My cell phone's ringing. It's on vibrate. I got to go take this call. Yeah.
I love the stories that start out, oh, you never believe what happened to me today. So a couple of days ago, I was doing this. I'm like, no. You started with today. How did we get to a couple of days ago?
Okay.
Right.
There was a terrible Fred Dryer movie in which he's a Marine in an embassy somewhere. But it starts with him like he's training recon force Marines, and he's got his buddy who dies later in the movie who's been with him for forever. And they got this new guy, and they're drinking beer after the graduation, and they're telling stories. And so Dryer says, and there we were in Nicaragua, trapped in an alley. There were 40 guys coming this way. There were 30 guys at the other end of the alley. I had a 45 at one round, and the corporal here, he had a rusty K-bar. And the guy looks at him and says, well, what happened next? And the corporal looks at him and says very solemnly, well, they killed us, of course. That's a great line, which I tend to steal at some point at a suitable place, Yes. But I mean,
you're not stealing in this business, you're not doing it right.
Well, but that's what a storyteller does. Okay, you go. Well, but you go around and it's kind of like a coral reef. Okay, everything that you see and do in your life, everything you read, everybody else's stuff you read. The reason the Honor Harrington series exists is that Jim Bain realized that every single thing I wrote was spawning a sequel. Because that's the way my brain works. I get to the end of the story and I say, ooh, now that could, kind of thing. So he said, well, Dave, here's a novel concept for you. What about planning a series from the beginning?
Good idea.
So I wrote 10 different proposals for him. And I didn't know at that point that for 25 years he'd been looking for someone to write Horatio Hornblower in space. So he got as far as number 2 on the list. Honor Harrington is a 6'2" female Eurasian starship captain. He didn't bother to read anything else on the list. Okay, he just said, "Write him a contract for 2 books. Make it 3. Hell, make it 4." Kind of, which was huge at that point in my career. But the Safehold books were on that list. The Multiverse, the Hell's Gate books were on that list. The Honor Harringtons were on that list. There's another one on that list that I have just finished doing actually I have to get back from my collaborator a brand new potential series that involves time travel and travel across universes and whatnot. So I'm still working through the list that I wrote back in 1990. But when I did the 3rd volume in the Mutineer's Moon novel, the series, and then did the Safehold books, people are like, well, it's the same thing. And that's because at that time, I didn't think I was ever going to get to do the Safehold books. So I took some of the elements of it and incorporated it into that story. So the Safehold books are not something that was inspired by Heirs of Empire. Okay, right. Heirs of Empire was the consolation prize for I'm not going to get to do Safehold. Safehold is going in a whole different place, a whole different direction, and its main focus really is freedom of conscience and human dignity. I mean, if you're going to get all deep and philosophical about it. My main goal in writing a story is to give honest work for honest pay in terms of entertaining my audience. But every time a writer starts to write, whether he or she intends to, you step up onto a soapbox. I can take a concept that you might find philosophically repugnant if we just discussed it back and forth. But if I create a believable, sympathetic character who shares that concept, it opens that concept to you in a way that might not otherwise be possible. Okay? And I think that an author owes it to his readership to try to be honest. And that's one reason why there's good guys and bad guys on both sides of most of the conflicts in my books. What concerns me the most about our current situation is the fact that John Kerry said some time ago, he was talking about Bill Buckley, who of course was, the father of modern conservatism. And he was talking about a eulogy that Buckley had written for one of his lifetime friends, who was a very liberal Jewish lawyer, I believe. And in Buckley's eulogy, he thanked him for 70 years of friendship, 70 years and he said, and 70 years of honest intellectual debate. Mm. And what Kerry said, and I really thought he'd put his finger on something, he said, the problem we have today is that it's no longer possible to have trans-ideological friendships. And that's one of the things that my characters in my books try to do. Yeah. Okay. Is to be able to reach, to look for that voice of calm in the middle of the debate. The villains in my books, if you look at them, are almost always people who refuse to do that.
Yes.
Okay. And the heroes, the really good people, are the responsibility takers. Honor Harrington never looks at a problem and says, not my job. She looks at the problem and says, can I do anything about it?
Right.
All right. And I think that's one reason for her popularity. Now, bearing in mind that the original series was only supposed to be 5 books long, okay, that she was supposed to die in book 5, she has acquired a certain stature that I didn't anticipate she was going to acquire in her various star systems and whatnot, which frankly has been one of the problems with the series for the last 3 books. One huge problem has been that because the time stream got pulled forward, the timeline got pulled forward, the Solarian League had 25 years less time to get a clue before it got into a shooting war with the Grand Alliance. Mm. And so their technology is just totally outclassed. It's like taking a battleship from the Spanish-American War up against a Nimitz-class carrier group. The disparity is that great, and that's been a big problem for trying to maintain a sense of genuine conflict. Yeah. And Honor, God bless her, is now Stedholder Harrington, Duchess Harrington, Avatar of the War Goddess Harrington, kind of thing.
Let's stack them up.
Yeah, and you can't send her on death rides anymore. Okay, I mean, you can't, because she could take the entire Grand Fleet with her, and there's nothing out there that could give the Grand Fleet a death ride experience.
Right.
And that's been a problem.
Well, I like that you were able to take, like in that series, in the Honorverse, you were able to do like the Crown of Slaves series and the Shadow series, and I love those little break-off series because you're right. You get to a point where Honor is so big now, you can't have the little adventure, and then you created these other places in your universe that you could.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say she's not going on an away team or anything like that. She might do Josh's ad read for him though if she were here. That's what my segment. Right
yeah. Well, one of the things that I made my mind up about Honor when I created her was that she was going to be a military officer, not a character in a Gene Roddenberry TV series.
Yep.
And captains of starships do not lead the away team when you don't even know what you're walking into down there. Also, if she was as good as she is and her star nation is in the conflict that it's going to be in, she's going to get promoted. And nobody's going to say, oh, your highest and best function is as a starship captain. They're going to say, hell no, we need you in the admiral's chair. Shut up and sit down.
Right.
So I could hamper her career by giving her enemies like Pavel Young and Baron Highridge and whatnot. And I could sidetrack her by having her shoot Pavel exactly the way he deserved to be shot, the whole 9 yards. But she was going to rise to high rank from the very beginning if she didn't die young. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that actually gives the series some of its appeal with readers who are tired of, well, Captain Kirk needs to always be a captain.
I was going to ask that. Is that something that you think your readers like? Is that progression of somebody's kind of like is part of their journey achieving more success somehow?
Well, it's not necessarily achieving more success, but it's dealing with the logical consequences of what they accomplish, for good or ill. And that's one of the things I think is an element in good storytelling that people don't pay enough attention to. It's kind of like, again, I'm not just picking on Star Trek here, but you go back and you look at the Transporter. Okay, they never dealt with the logical consequences of the Transporter. That's why the Transporter broke down almost as often as they hit a temporal rift. Okay. In Next Generation, when the Borg cube is coming to Earth, okay.
Yes.
I could have stopped it like that. Okay. They're beaming guys in and out, and the Borg's personal shields are adjusting to the phasers. I would love to have seen their shields adjust to 5 kilos of antimatter.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
That would have been bad.
There.
Yeah. And now we're done.
Yeah. And so I try very hard not to have a situation like that turn up in one of my books, not just in the warfighting technology that I give them, but in the character development. You know, where is this person going to be after the result, after the experiences they had in this book? How are they going to be different from where they were at the beginning of this book? And they're going to be different not just in their personal relations, but in their professional relations. And so I think that people have the sense of having watched Honor Harrington grow up, even though she was 42 years old when they first met her. Okay,
it's a good age.
They've seen her mature. I mean, okay, the original Honor Harrington. Okay, can you actually picture her telling the Prime Minister, telling her husband and the Prime Minister manager, I don't care if the Queen wants me at Mount Royal. I'm going home to hug the kids first. Tough.
Right.
Okay. You know, exactly. And so I think that's one of the reasons that this series works for some people. It doesn't work for other people because she grows and she changes, and some people believe that she's become too powerful and everything. What does irritate me is people who say that she never makes mistakes, because she makes lots of mistakes, but she's a smart, competent person, so she makes smart, competent mistakes.
Right.
Okay, she shot a prisoner of war without a trial.
Oops.
In honor of the Queen.
Shot
him right between the eyes, except that somebody grabbed her arm and shoved it out of the way just as she squeezed the trigger. Scotty Tremaine saved her career. If she had shot that guy, it would have been the end of her career, and deservedly so. Right. It should have been. Okay, that was a total loss of control on her part that in many ways is unforgivable in a military officer. But because the reader wanted to see the SOB dead, because I'd done a good enough job of explaining to them why she was going to kill him, they were all, you go, girl. Okay, so it's not a mistake.
Right.
Okay, again, when she's breaking out of Cerberus, the admiral who she has locked up is right when he's saying, we need to send word home. We need to send word home. And she's like, no. And the reason she won't do it is because she knows they'll send a ship to pull her out, but they probably don't have the ships to pull everybody else out. Yep. So she ain't going nowhere unless she can figure out how to take, and she commits every ship she's taken to a death ride if her ambush doesn't work perfectly, because the only alternative is to leave 250,000 people who trusted her behind.
Yeah.
And so again, everybody's saying, you go, you're doing the right thing. It's the completely wrong thing for her to do as an officer and a steadholder. It just happens to be the perfectly right thing for her to do as a human being and Honor Harrington. So it's like, oh no, she's perfect. She never makes mistakes. She never does this. She never does that. She does. It's just that the mistakes that she makes are mistakes they all agree with.
Agreed.
Okay.
I want to change directions a little bit on our talk. We hit. I want to talk about our show sponsor here really quickly, and then move into some talk about collaboration, which I think is
writing process and collaboration.
Very interesting. So our show sponsor today is the Legion Awakes by J.R. Handley. The Legion Awakes is a standalone military science fiction novel, and the book blurb goes like this: a century ago, all but 2 members of Lance Scipio's unit were executed for dishonoring his regiment. Now he has woken into a strange timeline and tasked with whipping into shape the worst squad of misfits in the entire human Marine Corps. The price of failure is death. Set in the nightmare future of the Human Legion novels, veteran J.R. Hanley's action-packed series is coming to audio. Grab a free audio copy of the prequel novella, The Demons of Corlear, by registering at oddfans.com, and you can get the Sleeping Legions book right now in the link I'm putting in the live chat. There you go. If you're listening on the feed, it'll be in the show notes. Thanks, JR, for sponsoring the episode and supporting Keystroke Medium. We appreciate it. And now we want to get into kind of a new, it's not a new thing, but it's definitely something that is becoming kind of a real steadfast thing in indie fiction and also in traditional. It's been in traditional for a while, and you've actually collaborated with several authors: John Ringo, Eric Flint, Timothy Zahn, and you started collaborating way before it became cool. So
a trendsetter.
Okay.
David Weber.
Is this going to be another? You're turning into an old fart moments, because if it is, I'm just like
I'll leave it. I'll leave it as before it became cool. He was collaborating, not way long ago in the when you were pounding on stone tablets.
Okay.
So, when we get into the talk, we can kind of talk about why you decided to collaborate and how that went. One of our first questions on collaboration came from Richard Fox, a fan of the show and author of the Ember War series. He says, "Mr. Weber, you've done a great many collaborations. What are some successful methods you've learned over the years for working with another author?"
Well, the most important lesson that I've learned is that every single collaboration works differently, because every single collaboration is between 2 individual people, and both parties to the collaboration. There's usually a senior partner and a junior partner, but not always. That's tended to be my experience. There's usually been an established writer and somebody who was less established. One of the at the time that John and I started collaborating, I was definitely the senior partner and he was the junior partner, but he has a scary learning curve. I still remember him calling me and saying, "Okay, Dave, I've got like 400,000 words." And I said, "Well, that's okay. That's good. We can work with that." And he said, "No," he said, "that's bad." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I'm halfway through the outline for the first volume." And I said, "Let me get back to you on this." I said, "Send it to me and I'll see what we can cut." Okay. And he sent it to me, and there was a lot of stuff in it that could be tightened, but there was nothing in what he'd done that could really, it could have been cut, but it shouldn't have been, because it was good stuff. So I called Jim Bain and I said, "Jim, you remember that trilogy that you have under contract with me and John?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How would you feel about 4 books?" He said, "Well, let me think. Okay, fine.
Sure.
And we did it. But John was definitely in the just learning the process period. The thing you have to, John is a perfect example of what I was talking about storytellers are born and writers are made. Okay. When he started writing Him Before Battle, he had not written anything since college. All right. And this is the story that he produced. Now, it went through a lot of iterations in editing before it got to the point that was published, but that was the story that came out of this guy who hadn't written anything since college. And so Jim asked me if I would be willing to do some collaborations with him, specifically in sort of a mentoring role. And so for the first novel, that's clearly what it was. By the second novel, he was junior partner, senior partner. By the third, equal partners.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's how steep and scary his learning curve was. And that's one reason to do a collaboration. Okay. I have a set number of reasons why I will do a collaboration. The first rule is I won't do a collaboration unless I expect the final product to be at least as good as either of us would have done alone. Mm. Okay. The second one is I won't do one just to increase output. I will do one if there's a story that I need to tell that I don't have enough time to tell by myself. But
Right.
that's not the same thing as just doing it to put another title out there. Okay? I won't do a collaboration where I am going to simply put my name on it and let somebody else do all the work, okay, and take all the blame or get all the credit, whichever way it works. If I'm involved in it, I'm going to be involved in it. I won't do it unless I expect to learn something or teach something. And I've never done a book yet that I haven't learned something from. And hopefully the people who have worked with me can say the same thing, that if nothing else, they learn, well, I ain't going to do another book with him. I'm just saying.
Screw that David guy.
Yeah. Man, he a pain in the... But so those are my ground rules for Oh, and there's one more. I won't do a collaboration unless I kind of like the other person I'm working with.
That helps.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's probably pretty close to essential. There have been some fairly famous collaborations where successful writing teams have hit. They really dislike each other a lot, sometimes to the point where they're only communicating with one another through their agent or their editor. I'm serious. I can think of 2 of those right off the top of my head.
Wow.
And one of them, who shall remain nameless, it was a very, very successful writing team. But I don't have the time or the energy to waste in doing something that I love with somebody who makes me not love what I'm doing.
Mm.
Okay. So I did. Now, I think that if you're going to do a collaboration with somebody, it needs to be a collaboration. Okay. When John and I did the Prince Roger books, okay, I did the tech Bible for how the naval warfare works, what the political structure is, and the basic storyline up through Roger's return to Earth, including I am the one who decided that Armand Panner had to die. Okay, you can't blame John for that. He killed everybody else, but I'm the one responsible for that.
Dang it.
It was part of transforming Roger into who he
Right.
had to be. Okay. I told John, I said, okay, now you have complete freedom to design the planet Marduk. If I only had realized what he was going to do, I might have put a few ratings like that. But he had a great time doing it. And his take on Roger is subtly different from mine. And I think adds quite a bit to the character, because I see Roger as somebody who has been, and the 2 views aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, which is another thing that's cool when you're doing a collaboration. But I see Roger as somebody who has been hammered on the anvil into absolute focused purpose and tough-minded, willing to do whatever needs to be done. And he really, really needs Nimeshet as his support, as his pillar. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
John sees Roger as somebody who has actually been pushed over the edge, but who is using his madness to do what must be done. Mm-hmm. And Nimeshet really is his artificial conscience in a way, the person that he uses as his compass for, have I gone a step too far in accomplishing what I need to do? In some ways, in a lot of ways, John's Roger is a sociopath, in the sense that he has his goals, which are really, really benign. He really cares about, it's his duty to protect the subjects of the empire, to create a situation where the empire will thrive, where people will have the opportunity to grow and all this. That's what he wants. But he's willing to do anything it takes to get there. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that we're talking about the same character, but we're coming at him slightly differently as the people who are telling the story. And I think that's one of the huge advantages of a collaboration is to have that, but what about from somebody else that might not occur to you in the first place? I mean,
Scott and I had a...
Yeah,
go ahead. Scott and I had a lot of that when we talked about doing a large kind of fantasy project with kind of put on a side burner now, but we had a lot of conversations in the planning stages where we were doing what about this and what about that, and we were able to come up with a lot of ideas that, like you said, the other person wouldn't have thought of, and able to roll with that. One of the questions I had was, you mentioned when you start out with say a junior writer, if we want to put it in that perspective, and you're the more senior guy, did your process of collaboration change from the first novel to the third one, and what was the process that you went through starting out in that first book where go ahead.
It absolutely changes. Let's put it this way: the guy who's the senior writer the first time around had better be smart enough to let it change if the series is going to succeed and prosper. Now, I, of course, am a very shy and retiring and diffident person. Okay, I hold no strong opinions or anything else. so I always have to look out that the other writer doesn't just walk all over me and take control of the book.
I see that as being pretty bad, dangerous part of that.
Well, yes. Well, but the truth is the other way around. Okay. Other writers that I've worked with, I try really, really, really hard not to let my enthusiasm or whatever get carried away and I step on what they're doing. But they have to be, and I tell them this, they have to be willing to tell me, wait, wait a minute, and most of the people that I've collaborated with have done that. The book that I'm working on right now that has not been bought yet, so I can't guarantee that it will be. But I invited Jacob Holo, Jacob Holowak, writes under Jacob Holo, who is self-published, to create the third. I needed 2 different 30th centuries. Okay. And so I said, Jacob, I've built so many future societies now that some of the same building blocks kind of appear in all of them. So you're an engineer with BMW. You build the 30th century. I give you carte blanche. There are, here's what I need the 30th centuries to do. Here's the mindset I need out of them for my story concept. Go. Oh, he had so much fun. And looking at what he came up with, so did I. Okay. I mean, it was great. That's one of the things you can do with a collaboration. But if you are the senior partner, you have to be willing to let go and take advantage of what the junior partner brings to the table. Okay, and when you're equal partners, you have to be able to sit there and frequently you'll build things together, because you'll say, yeah, I was thinking about this, and they're going to say, oh, that's cool, and if we did that, we could do this. Or the other person will say, are you serious? Look, if you do that, this whole plot element falls apart, kind of thing. And that's great, but that's part of what I'm saying when I say that every single collaboration is different.
Right.
Okay, it's who are you working with this time? What are the strengths they bring to the table? What are the strengths you bring to the table? And how do you coordinate them so that all of them are strengths rather than weaknesses in the final product? I've done collaborations with first novelists like Joelle Presby in The Road to Hell. And that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work because she was a first novelist, and she was the biggest weakness that Joelle had as a writer had nothing to do with writing style or storytelling. She was worried about word count. And so she was trying to hold word count down. And I said, Joelle, this is a David Weber novel. Okay.
Do what you want to do.
If the hardcover is not 4 inches thick, nobody's going to buy it anyway. But I said, we can always take things out but what we put in has to be written long enough to work. Okay. And as soon as she understood that I was serious about that, she relaxed, and her prose got so much better because she was taking the words that she needed to get the thought fully developed, and so forth. And that was one of the teaching moments in working with her on the book. I got a couple from her in the course of that book too. I usually do. And I was very, very pleased with the final product. The problem is where we find to fit the fourth book into my writing schedule, and my writing schedule is the Roadblock. I had a serious health scare last fall because of my writing schedule. I was passing out. I was losing complete days of memory. And I was basically told by my neurologist, David, get the hell out of the office and stay there for 2 months. I can't. I got deadlines. David, get the hell out of the office and stay there for 2 months.
Doctors are so pushy.
I can't. Am I failing to make myself clear? At which point the 5'1" red-haired person sitting beside me said, "Oh, you're making yourself perfectly clear." And I knew I was doomed. So I really did not write at all from September of last year through mid-January. And for a while there, I thought I would never write again at all. It turned out that what I had done was I'd been averaging like 3 hours and 20 minutes of sleep for like 6-7 months. And because I was driving to meet deadlines. It was affecting not just me physically, it was also affecting the work that I was doing.
Right.
So I took the downtime, I stayed out. I came back and started work on the collaboration with Tim Zahn and Tom Pope, A Call to Vengeance, that is due out, I think, in March. And that was very good because I was doing the tactical scenes in a manuscript, a storyline that Tim had already pretty much written on the basis of our agreed on, tech Bible and stuff.
Right.
And Tim has not written before this series, and a couple of short stories, has not written extensively in the Honorverse. And so he's done more Star Wars and planet, like his combat, his Cobra Legion is mainly planetary commandos, that kind of thing. So he hasn't had to deal with okay, how long do I have to accelerate on this heading to get to that point kind of thing.
Right.
And I had to do some major surgery on some of the movement sequences in the book, and finding a way to do that and leave Tim's storyline intact to get from where he needed to be at the beginning of the scene to where he needed to be at the end of the scene was very challenging.
That would be challenging.
And I enjoyed it a lot by the time I got done. And I hope that I tried really, really hard not to step on his storyline because I loved where he was going with it. I just had to do the transportation part of it kind of thing. But that was my training wheels to kind of get back into the saddle. And now, like I say, I've just finished Uncompromising Honor, the first rush draft. And by the way, Josh, since the last time we talked, it went from 273,000 words to 286,000.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
last time we talked yesterday.
It was yesterday. That's actually a fantastic segue, and I'm going to mention too that I got to see a little cool paper of the notes for the last chapter. I couldn't read it. I should have read it. Oh, there. Hold on. Let me.
There you go. There they are. Okay.
Ta-da!
Yep. Done.
You saw it here first.
You saw it here first.
Yes. Yes.
So I actually have a question about that. Yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about how you broke your wrist and you had to find another way to produce so you could meet your publisher's deadlines, who was knocking on your door saying, "Please write books."
Icy Steps. Steps. The first year that Sharon and I were married, we have a wooden deck system that runs all the way around the house, and it was just after dark was actually kind of in that period between dark and full dark, between dusk and full dark. And I did not realize that frost had formed on this deck system. And there was still enough light that I didn't turn on the front light when I went out the door, which might have shown me the glittery frost on the steps. And I might have gone, oh, need to be a little careful here. So I slipped and I went out about 4 feet and down about 4.5. Ouch. And I caught all my weight on the palm of my right hand. All the way down, I'm thinking, don't catch yourself, don't catch yourself. Unfortunately, reflexes get away. Right. And I compressed my wrist by between 1/4 and 1/2 inch, broke it into 57 pieces.
Should have gone for an even 60. I mean, come on.
I tried. Well, okay, they only put 56 back, so I got an even number.
Sharon, get the hammer. We need to fix this.
But well, actually, after I rolled around on the ground holding my wrist for a while, saying words Methodist lay speakers aren't supposed to know. But I got up, and it was, and of course, it's my right wrist, so I can't get my keys out of my right pocket, you know. So I ring the doorbell, and Sharon comes out and she opens it, and I says, I think I broke my wrist. And my loving wife's very first words were, "You better be lying." Okay. And we took me over to the hospital, which is only a few minutes from the house. And the radiologist comes out after looking at the x-rays and says, now tell us again how you did this. And I said, I slipped on the steps and I caught myself. I felt something in my wrist go pop. And she said, oh, we know you did. And I said, is it broken? And she said, well, we're not actually allowed to interpret the photos, but oh, we know you did.
Wow.
Okay. So they put 56 pieces back. They had one little piece that they couldn't put back, so they kept it.
They probably kept it as like for a souvenir. Hey, this is David Weber's wrist bow. I got it right here.
Hey, they gave me in return 2 titanium plates, 12 screws, and 6 pieces of wire. So I cleaned up. But I was in the middle of a book when this happened. And they said, oh, yeah, you're going to be, you know, in a sling and everything for like, 6 to 8 weeks. Jim Bain, needless to say, was not hugely pleased about this because the book was already scheduled. So I called him and I told him, and he said, have you ever considered using voice recognition software? And I said, yeah, I tried it years ago. Yeah, that couldn't have been that many years ago. I tried it. It really didn't work, you know. He said, well, it's gotten better since. I said, yeah, sure. And he said, okay, if I buy it, will you try it? And I said, okay. So he bought me Dragon Natural Speaking, and I think it was like version 2.2 for those of you who use Dragon.
We're on point like 17 now or something.
Yeah, it's like, you know, here's your dragon, okay? You're hammering out on the stone, you know. At that point, it took about 45 minutes to train it before you could even start using it. Today, it's like you put it in out of the box, you can go, and it gets better. And I've used it ever since. And I honestly believe that if you went back and looked at my books, you could not pick the point at which I changed from keyboard to voice recognition. I hadn't realized at the time that I'd really been telling a story to somebody on the other side of the display the entire time. I'd just been using a keyboard to communicate with him because he wasn't too bright and his hearing wasn't very good. Okay. The one thing that I found that was really interesting was I composed sentences at my typing speed so that I could keep going steadily. Okay. And I type about 110 words a minute dirty and about 80 words a minute clean. So that was my writing speed. Well, the Dragon, you can dictate at 250 words a minute. And so I've suddenly found myself needing to compose entire phrases of the sentence or to do it one word at a time, because the Dragon needed either the clarity of the single word or a phrase that it could interpolate to, I wasn't sure about that one, but this word would make sense there, especially based on your speech patterns that I'm familiar with, you know, et cetera. So that was the biggest single change in how I composed what I was doing. with the wrist damage, I can only type for about 45 minutes fairly steadily before my hand does this, and I have to go up into the tower and ring the bells some more, you know, me and Quasi, before I can get back down and go back to work. But with Dragon, the controlling factor is voice fatigue. As you get more tired, Dragon has more trouble understanding you. Now, Dragon has some drawbacks. I'm the only major writer who I know uses Dragon. Okay, now I know there's some others who do or who are experimenting with it. I'm just the only one that I personally know uses it. Dragon is biased towards business and technical writing. And so, like I was telling Josh yesterday, if I say a character smiled weekly, Dragon thinks that means he smiled every Tuesday, whether anything funny happened that day or not. It's biased towards proper nouns. For example, if I say the pearl and the ruby sparkled, it's going to think I'm talking about somebody named Pearl and somebody named Ruby, and cap them, unless I go through and remove capitalized pearl and capitalized ruby from the base vocabulary. So, and sports teams. Okay, my favorite example is, you know, if the bear chased the lion cub across the field while the pirate watched. Okay, they think that the Detroit Lions the Chicago Bears are chasing the Detroit Lions across the field while the Pittsburgh Pirates watch. That's how it's going to capitalize the words. So you have to kind of adjust for that. There's also, you have problems with homonyms.
Right. Oh, yeah.
You have problems with which article it chooses to use, whether it hears a or the. Because if you think about it, in speech, and the sound an awful lot alike. For example, an and. All right. If I want to be sure that it uses the article an instead of the conjunction and, I have to say and singular, because that's what it's learned to recognize. If I say so-and-so singular, then it knows it applies only to the words that I have specifically associated with.
No, you could do that. That's an interesting pro tip there.
Yeah. Well, I use Dragon Legal Professional, and I use it in part because it lets me build multiple vocabulary. So I have one for each literary universe that I move back and forth between. I was talking to Josh yesterday. The biggest problem with using Dragon is that it is such a RAM hog. Okay. If you get above 5,000-6,000 words, it really starts slowing down. You'll give it a phrase and you'll have to sit there for a couple of seconds while you wait for it, and then boom, the words turn up on the screen. In addition, let's say that I'm working on the book and I say, God, what did I call that in chapter 12? And so I need to go back and take a look at chapter 12. Okay. To get out of the part that I'm working, I usually work in chapter files so that I can hold them to 5,000 to 10,000 words, and then I paste them into the master manuscript. But if I need to get out of the chapter I'm working on and go back to the master manuscript to look something up, Dragon insists on completely unloading what I'm working on from memory and then loading the new file before it will let me do anything. I have to sit there with the screen frozen while I wait for it to work. So what I have now is I have 3 monitors, 2 computers, and a server. I've got 3 laptops. There's the computer in my bedroom. All of them are tied into the server, and all of them have Dropbox. Okay, so wherever I'm working, whatever computer I'm on, they all go through the server, and they're available to all the machines wherever I am, whether I'm working on the road or wherever. And I always work with at least 2 computers up. Okay, I take 2 laptops with me when I travel. One of them is the machine that I'm working on. That's usually with the laptops, it's the faster of the 2. Okay, and with the best RAM. The other one is where I have all the reference files that I need up. That would be like the rough draft that I'm pasting into. I have input director on both, so I can cut and paste from one machine to the other. Okay.
Oh, neat.
And so I do the file. I'm done with it. I come over here. I open the rough draft, which is open all the time. I've got the character lists and everything else up here too that I'm going back and forth between. So I bring up the rough draft. I go to the bottom. I cut and paste. I save. Okay, it uploads to the server and to Dropbox like that. Then I come back over here and I can delete everything in my working chapter file and start the next one. Okay, and then the third, and so this screen is what Office 1. Okay, this screen is Office 2. This one over here is also Office 1, but it's the one where I'm going to open my my internet if I need to do research or something, so that I've got everything going on here in front of me at once. Okay.
Right.
I would guess that even before I finally got my setup the way that I wanted it, I still hit the occasional where I, once again, the Methodist lay speaker is addressing words that he shouldn't address to the computer, which are totally inappropriate because computers don't have parents, legitimately married or not. You know?
And they don't do certain other activities. They also accuse them of being.
However, having said all of that, I would say that my output probably is at least 30% higher and might be even more than that using Dragon.
A quick question is, do you correct as you go when you're using Dragon? Because I find
you have to.
Otherwise, the editing, the post, because you can do like a ton of words and then you go back and try to edit it a week later and you forgot what you're trying to say.
And the sentence that makes absolutely no sense when you look at it, the words that were chosen. No, absolutely. Dragon doesn't care whether or not the sentence makes sense. It only cares that it's spelled right.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's it. And if you tell it that a word is pronounced a certain way, even if you didn't mean to tell it that, okay, it says, I heard you. And it always remembers that that pronunciation means this word. It might mean other words too, but it means this word. And so you get them. And I will say this, the one drawback to using Dragon is that it puts more burden on the copy editors.
Right.
And not all of them are equal to the task. Okay.
That can be a lot of responsibility, especially for type of the volume of work you're talking about.
Well,
I do.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. When we get to a pause, I have a couple of questions that we had asked from our chat room. I'd like to get to too.
Well, let me just say it doesn't have to happen just with this. In Mutineer's Moon, the last line that Jiltanith has in the entire book has a typo in it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now this is in the original printing. I'm not sure it's in here, which reverses the meaning of the sentence.
Oh,
yes, it's a contraction that has N''T added to it, and it reverses the meaning of the sentence. And I didn't even notice it when I was doing the author's proofread. And see, this was before I could submit them in electronic format. They had to be re-keyboarded at the typesetters. Okay, and that's how that crept in, and it got biased. And of course, part of the problem is that she's speaking in like 16th century English.
Is it what's thou calling? Is that the line?
So Josh has got the book actually.
I got it.
Yeah,
so I'm looking at
I knew you did.
Yeah. What's the line read now, Josh?
It says, while I read the line before, it says, he bent over the broken body and snatched it up, careless of Anu's wail of anguish. No. That's not our final line. The final line is where they're going aboard. They're going aboard Dahak to head out. Oh, I've got another chapter to go. Hold on.
Aha!
I was on the wrong one.
Good. That one's good.
Let's see. Jiltanith. Let's see. Captain arrived. No, that's not it. Let's see. There's so much words here.
Sorry, I can't believe that you would find that a surprise.
Tone it down a little bit, David, on your word count here. We're trying to find a specific.
Yeah, I know. I did it on purpose.
I'm having maybe I'm not looking at the right.
I'm trying to see. Anyway, go ahead with your question.
Well, let me ask some of these questions. Now, some of these kind of go back a little bit, and I have three, and I'm just going to read them just straight as they were typed in by the guest. So I have Ken McClellan. Says that he has a lead character that has, much like the real world, basically been promoted until she's no longer useful. How could I make her useful again without demoting her?
You have to move her into a different role. Okay. All right. You're familiar with Annie McCaffrey's Pern novels?
Right.
Okay. Lessa and Flower, when you meet them in the first novel, Lessa's like 20, okay? And she's going to become the Weir leader and everything else. They're absolutely critical to what's going on. By the time you get to the White Dragon and the later novels, they're the senior Weir leaders of Pern. They're still critical to what's going on because they're the people who are making the plans, providing the leadership and so forth, but they're no longer the frontline characters. They're no longer having to fight against an entrenched system that's going to kill everybody on the planet if they don't fix it, kind of thing. Okay. That's sort of where Honor is headed, has been headed for a while. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to find a role where the function of the character is still critically important, but it's not necessarily the one he or she had to begin with. And that works better for me than for some people because I have so many secondary and tertiary characters that I can bring in to be Kirk leading the landing party while Kirk stays where the hell he's supposed to be.
Right, and those are probably all reader favorites. People like those characters. They're not, they're going to enjoy going down to the surface with them.
Yeah, okay. Shannon Foraker was mentioned earlier. Okay, she's a good example. Okay, when we first meet Shannon, she's just the TAC officer, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then my favorite line, you have favorite lines and they change, but in many respects, one of my all-time favorite lines from the entire series is "Oops," which she blows up the 12 super dreadnoughts. Sorry about that.
My bad.
And in the current book, she and Sanja Hemphill are sitting down discussing where they need to go with their technology. Okay, which is a scene that I've wanted to do for forever. All right. And by the way, you also are going to find out where Bolt Hole is and how it came into existence, and some other stuff. Yeah, that's one of the. I don't like books where you have a whole bunch. Here's a character, he's interacting with the main character, and he's the lieutenant all the way through. Okay, he's not the lieutenant. He's Lieutenant Jones.
Right. He's a real person. He has
give him a name. Okay, and whenever I do that, okay, I put that character into my character list, and I usually jot down something about him or her that I incorporated into the story, like the color of his eyes, how tall he is. Actually, for most characters, when I create them, I create age, I create coloring, I create height. I tag the age to a specific year in universe so that if I come back to this character 10 years later, I'll be able to go, okay, they're 36 now, whatever. Idea. And then it all goes into, that's one of the things you can do with electronic data storage. Okay, Now, we did have a problem that I got hit with ransomware about 5 years ago. And we never got the files on 3 of the books back. Okay, so on 3 of the Honor Harrington novels, I have no access to the basic reference material that I used when I built the books at this point. Fortunately, I upgrade my tech Bible for every book as I go along, and these were older books, not the one I was currently working on. So I didn't lose any of that, but I lost a lot of character notes and that kind of thing. Now, Mark Gudis, who is a friend of mine and who is part of BU9, the support group that I have, has done an Honorverse character index, which is an ongoing project, believe me. But literally, I can pull up his file that he's done this index on, and his first name, last name, and tells you where this character first appeared and everything else, so that I can, if I know the character's name, I can still go and find the reference, and that will point me at the book I need to go to meet this character for the first time. That's how I set it up. But what it does is Lieutenant Jones can be Scotty Tremaine, the ensign in the first book, who's Admiral Tremaine in Shadow of Freedom, kind of thing. And Alice Truman from Honor of the Queen is another example. Tom Theismann. I mean, how many people saw Tom Theismann coming at the end of Basilisk Station?
Right.
Okay. I was very careful to make everybody think I was talking about the French Revolution and Esther McQueen was going to be Napoleon, the whiff of grape shot, you know, the whole 9 yards. And then I blew her up, and everybody's like, what? He just blew up Napoleon. Okay. And it was because she wasn't Napoleon. It was because Tom Theismann was going to be Cincinnatus restoring the Republic. And I'd been headed that way from the very second book where you met him. And I'd just been quietly building him, kind of keeping him in your eye, but not as one of the central, you know, policy shapers and whatnot. So
I think I did find that line.
Yeah.
If we want to try it again, it's nay, my Colin, she said equally softly, I ha said my farewells long since, 'tis there my future doth lie.
Okay.
'Tis there my future doth lie.
Yeah, okay. The doth was doesn't. Does not. Okay.
We're like, doesn't mean the same thing.
No, it's kind of the other way around. Yeah. Okay. You said you had 3 questions.
I'll read both of them to you, and then you can go through them. Oops, now I got to get my questions back. Come on here, Mr. Moon. So I think some of these have already been kind of covered, and I'll read them. I'll read both questions. The first one's from Ralph Kern. It says some of it's referring to you. Some of his most fascinating characters are the antagonists. I love Theismann, Torville, and Foraker. What makes a good foil to the heroine? The second question is from Richard Fox. It says, Mr. Weber, Honor Harrington has been in print for many years, and the total library is a lot of books. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. It says, how do you keep readers engaged for so long, and how do you get new readers to buy that first book? So I can read those again if you want to address it.
That's okay. On the question of foils for the main character, there are several ways that you can come at that. In the Safehold books, Clinton is just a despicable piece of work. Okay, he's one of the very few characters that I've created. High Ridge is probably another one. Who has 0 redeeming characteristics. Although there are some people in the book who believe that they do have redeeming characteristics. Okay, but they really don't. All right,
they really just don't.
They don't. They're designed to be, in essence, pure evil for the good guy to oppose. Okay. Now the evil can be, like with Clinton, it's on a macro scale. Okay. And with High Ridge, it's just this innate pettiness that makes him a macro threat. If you see what I'm saying. But they're 2 totally different types of adversary, a foil. In my opinion, a more effective foil is somebody you have to fight, but you wish you didn't. Thirsk in the Safehold books, Theismann in the Honor Harrington books. Okay, this is a character on the other side who's compelled to be your enemy when they ought to be your friend. And that, to me, is the real tragedy of human conflict. Honor sums it up in talking to Houseman. By the way, the reason that Edward Houseman is the industrialist, the capitalist from hell who is critical to winning in the Safehold books was because I have a friend named Houseman who was upset with me over Reginald and the other Houseman. So I decided, okay, fine, I'll make him a capitalist and, you know, make him critical. But anyway, Honor says to him at one point, you know, there are going to be perfectly legitimate differences of opinion that lead to conflict. Which is because she's a historian, so she recognizes that's the case. And that's the case in some of the best conflicts in literature. is there are perfectly legitimate reasons for these people to find themselves in opposition to one another. And they don't necessarily have to hate each other. They just have to kill each other. Okay.
Right.
And that's the tragedy. That's
Yeah.
the tragedy. That they realize that they're having to kill people who should have been their friends.
Right.
Okay. So that's one way to do it. And I have found that Honor has the advantage in that she generally approves of her system, her society. There are things about it she doesn't like that you see particularly early on when she's talking about the cronyism of the noble families in the Navy and how this has been a problem. Well, that gets largely blown away in the course of this war for survival. And it's been headed that way ever since Roger came on the scene. That's one of the reasons I was so glad to be able to write I Will Build My House of Steel in the Honorverse Companion, because I'd always known how critical Roger was to the survival of the Star Kingdom. I knew what he'd done to prepare the ground for the Star Kingdom's survival, and there'd never been a place to put it into one of the novels. And so by doing you can call it either a long novella or a short novel. It's about 56,000 words, I think. But it did a couple of things. One, it put a piece of new fiction into a book that otherwise would have been bought only by the real Honorverse geeks who wanted the background.
Right.
And it simultaneously made that background available to people who would only bought it because of the fiction, but who got the background as a reference at the same time. So it's kind of a win-win from that perspective. From my perspective, it let me tell you about Roger, and it let me show you even more than Jane Lindskold's Queen's Gambit Decline did, how killing Roger was not the smartest move the People's Republic ever made, but why they would inevitably have thought it was.
Yeah.
Because they knew what he was doing. It was just their bad luck that they got rid of him and got somebody who was just as bad, and by now it's personal. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways to build. Now, what was the second?
The second question is basically if you're writing a very long series, I think Richard Fox has a longer series also, and so we talk a lot about that is how long's the right length for a series, how do you keep people engaged, and how do you get people into the series in the first place?
Okay, I think that, all right, you write the series as long as the series needs to be written. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not trying to be Zen. Okay.
Meditate.
I have said in the past that there are two times to stop writing a series. One is when you've finished the story you want to tell. And the other one is when the books are no longer selling. And the reason to stop when the books are no longer selling, in addition to the fact that you need to write something that does because you have kids who are going to college, is that if they stop selling, that's the readers voting that it's time to do something else. Now, the biggest problem with a long series is that I don't care who you are. There are going to be strong books and there are going to be weak books in the series. There are going to be books that do things that you need structurally for the series that damages them as standalone stories. Okay?
Yeah, I can see that.
There are going to be books where, for whatever reason, you didn't have time to do. War of Honor, that comes to my mind. War of Honor is 30,000 words too long. Okay, maybe 40. There's nothing in the book that doesn't need to be there, but it could be there more concisely. The problem is that it ran into another project that wound up using a lot more time than was anticipated, and Simon & Schuster moved the release date up. So there wasn't time for me to do the final edit on that book. Okay, At All Costs, which is the one. It's just going to be sad, but I can't keep the title straight anymore. The one that Alistair McKean dies in, where Honor comes through from Trevor Starr and takes out Genevieve Chin's fleet while she's coming in. Okay, there's a problem with that book. And the problem is that I took out of the book where I had originally put it in the scene in which the Havenite naval intelligence guys provide an estimate for the maximum effective range for the control link for Apollo. Okay, because it just didn't fit where I'd put it. I was going to put it back in somewhere else because Chin has this information when she is fighting the battle. So she knows from this briefing that she's gotten that when Honor launches this mega salvo, she's beyond the effective FTL control range of the missiles.
Right.
She's wrong, but she knows it.
Right.
Okay. And it takes a couple, 3 minutes for her natural tactical instincts to overcome the, well, I know I'm out of range, at which point she orders her fleet to hyper out. And the problem is that it takes a little while for the hyper generators to cycle, and she's got big ships, and she runs out of time. But two things happened. One is I never got the briefing on the range reinserted. I forgot to do that. So Chin has information the reader doesn't have, which helps her to draw the conclusion that she drew. And the second one is I had told readers repeatedly about cycle times on hypergenerators and everything else, but I didn't say it again right there. Okay. When I wrote it, I was like, okay, the reader knows this. I don't have to tell them. Okay. And in the editing process, I didn't think about it one way or the other. Okay. If I had that book back, I would change both of those. And it would make Chin's decisions a lot more understandable than they are the way the book is written now. The way the book is written now, I have at least one person who hates that book because he thinks I set Chin up and basically said, take a fall so Honor will look good. Because anybody with a brain should have gone ahead and hypered out, you know, the instant they saw these missiles coming.
That was the question was, have you got any negative reviews on that? Because I know sci-fi readers are very smart and often detailed oriented. I didn't know if anybody had drilled on that.
I get that kind of when that happens, when something like that happens, the criticism is deserved. Okay, now when the criticism is based in Weber is an idiot and that's why he did it, that maybe not so much, but the oops, you made a mistake, you know, because I tried very hard, like I said earlier, to consider the logical implications of what my technology is doing. But yeah, I get now what irritates me is when I get criticized over something that I have. All right, here's an example. Missiles in the Honorverse. Okay. I'm like, okay, it's really important you have the telemetry channels so you can do blah, 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 blah. And people are like, oh, give me a break. We got missiles today that can find a target on the other side of the planet. You're telling me that, 2,000 years from now, you can't do a launch and leave missile at any damn range you want and it will find the target. And I'm like, you really aren't paying attention to what I'm saying here. And I deal with this again in the current book, so hopefully it will. But it's like each of these missiles, it's like, that missile is looking through a soda straw, okay? And the vulnerable aspects of these ships are tiny because of the wedge, all right? Unless you're going to fire down the throat or up the kilt, you've got a target that maybe is 10, 15 kilometers, and the ship on a super dreadnought is 150 kilometers inside the wedge. So the angle that you have to be at to get the shot is critical. All right, so the way that this works is the missiles are a dispersed sensor array.
Right.
All of them are reporting back to the ships that are controlling the missiles. Each individual missile can only see this teeny tiny part of the total battlefield and may be spoofed by ECM that another missile's not spoofed by. Okay, the control ship is compiling all this information and analyzing it and building a far more detailed map of the battlefield, and is able to tell missile number 163, no, that's a decoy you're looking at. You need to come over here. Okay, that's why missile fire gets so much more effective when it's in telemetry range. Okay. Now, if I fire a missile, will it find the ship? Oh, yeah, probably. Will it find the ship at an angle that will allow it to attack? Well, that gets a whole lot more problematical, and so one of the things, for example, that the Apollo system does for the Mantis is the control missiles that follow along behind the actual attack missiles are designed to do what the mothership did. They're communicating across the salvo with one another and sharing information, and they have this highly developed software and so forth in here, that because there's no point in putting really highly developed software into an old style missile because it's not going to have enough data to make use of it. But the control missiles do. And so, and I've explained that, and I still get people like, well, Weber's a Neanderthal, where, he doesn't understand it.
We're just banging rocks together over here.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that people need to remember that the first novel in the Honor Harrington book, the Honor Harrington series, was written in 1991. April of next year will be the 25th anniversary of Basilisk Station. A quarter century is a lifetime in terms of what computers can and can't do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So if I were starting today, okay, my starting assumptions would probably be significantly different. Unfortunately, the ones that I have are grandfathered into the series.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they've held up pretty darn well when you come down to it. There are a couple of things that I've been able to do kind of on a retrofit basis, like I've gone back and integrated the Unilink into the stories and so forth. And if you really, really are going to be a stickler when you read the series, you're going to wonder where the hell they were for the first 10 years. And where they were was, this is what we were referring to as our comms, personal comms and whatnot that you're carrying around. Are we running out of time?
We are. Yeah. Well, we're over. I think probably this now hits the record for the longest show, but that's really okay because I had a great time listening. I did have one final question, then we'll wrap up. And after that quarter century that has gone from Basilisk Station, even the novels before that, to now, if there's one thing that you could go back and tell yourself back then that now, what would that be? That piece of advice.
Oh, gee. I really don't know.
Probably something about getting in touch with Keystroke Medium earlier in your career.
Yeah.
A lot easier.
Well, I would say that I would tell myself to submit 10 years earlier than I did. Let me touch on something here because this is near and dear to my heart. I could have been published a minimum of 10 years before I was, if I'd submitted 10 years before I did. Okay. Now, would I have been the same writer I was when Steve and I did Insurrection? No, probably not. But I would have been publishable. I think it was Keith Laumer who once said, there is no such thing as the great unpublished American novel. There is only the great unsubmitted American novel, because if it's a great novel and you submit it, eventually you will find somebody who will print it. John Paul Jones, one of my favorite aphorisms from history is from him. And he said, it seems to be a law inflexible unto itself, that he who will not risk cannot win. Okay, a whole bunch of people who could be successful writers, it's very important to them, and this describes me, it's very important to them, it's a part of who they are, that I could be a successful writer. I could. Okay.
Right.
I mean, yeah. All right. But if you don't want to take the chance of losing that. You don't want to say, well, I could, and submit and then find out, ooh, I can't. Okay.
Right.
Now, I think that electronic publishing in some ways has changed that. My friends Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandry are about to bring out their second volume from their Fistful of Credits, anthology.
Yeah, Scott and I are in that book.
Well, see, I've just
we snuck in the back door. We were sneaky.
So you know whereof I speak. But there are, back in the 30s and the 40s, even the 50s, there were the pulps. There were the monthly science fiction. There constantly the need for new short fiction. It was a way to break in. Now there is the internet. And if you're going to self-publish, you don't have to have anybody who says, you know what, I'll buy your book. Okay. I mean, if you're self-publishing, that's a good thing and a bad thing. But until you put your work out there, it cannot fail.
Right.
And so you're sitting here saying to yourself, I could be a writer if I just found the time or whatever. Well, the problem is that if you don't try it, one day it goes from I can be a writer to I could have been a writer.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing I think I've ever met. It's one of my biggest fears is that exact phrase.
So if you don't put yourself out there in the first place, you'll never get there. That's like telling my girls when they're playing soccer, okay, if you don't take the shot, you cannot score. All right? And the same thing is true in writing. And what I would tell myself if I could climb into a time machine and go back and do it, is I would tell myself, okay, you know what? You've been writing for yourself all this time. You've been designing war games. Isaac Asimov once said that his greatest fear was that someday the publishers would figure out that he'd write whether they paid him or not. Okay, and I think for most successful writers and storytellers, that's absolutely true. We do. We would, whether it's just for our friends and family or ourselves. It's what we do. Okay? All right, but if that's all you do, if you don't take the chance on finding out that the rest of the world doesn't think you can write, you will never have an opportunity to prove to the rest of the world and to yourself that you can. And the other piece of advice that I would give myself is always remember that it is your writing voice that sells the story. Two people can tell exactly the same story. One of them will succeed, one will fail. The one who will succeed is the one who tells the story in a way that resonates with the reader. Okay? And it has to be your voice. It can't be anybody else's. You can't think, how would David Weber do this? How would Annie McCaffrey do this? How would Roger Zelazny do this? You have to think about, how do I need to do this? And it's going to be what you produce is going to be an alloy of everything you've ever read, because that's how you learn. Okay? Right. But the final outcome is an alloy, and an alloy is unique. That's what you have to remember if you're going to succeed as a writer. I know people who I think could have been just as successful as I've been, except they worried about how someone else would have told the story rather than the way that he would have told the story. And I think that's one thing that has gotten into the way of some people who are doing fanfic and never move from fanfic to their own independent writing, because they are using not just the universe that someone else created, but they're telling the same kind of stories in it. Okay. Right. So exactly. There you go. I actually did think of something I would have told myself.
There you go. We have some other questions I like, but I think maybe if we could ever get you back on the show again, we could talk again. I think it might be a possibility. I don't want to.
Oh, sure.
You don't have to commit now, obviously, but we'd love to have you back. I think we could go all day on this.
Well, okay. What you're doing here, in a way, is an opportunity for a conversation with a large, hopefully, audience, one that's interested. And one of the things that was very important to me when I was setting out was the support of established writers. I remember the year that Path of the Fury came out, I was at a convention in Virginia, and Roger Zelazny was there. And we were sitting at the same autographing table because Z and W, okay? And I had signed books for all 7 people who had ever heard of me, at that time, and he was in a brief hiatus, okay, on signing books. And he turns and he looks at me and he says, "I finished reading Path of the Fury last night." I'm like, "Oh my God." Oh my God. Roger's Zelazny read my book. Oh my God, I'm gonna, And I said, and I will never forget what he said to me. He said, "I think it may have been the best blend of science fiction and fantasy I have ever read." Bam.
Wow.
From Roger Zelazny.
I would have just laid down on the floor or something right there.
Oh man. Well, Roger. One of the great privileges of my life was to end up with Roger Zelazny as a friend. I remember I was out visiting him, and the summer that he died. And my favorite novel that he ever did was This Immortal, which I had not realized for a long time was his first novel. And I'd wanted a signed copy. I don't collect signed books, but I'd wanted a signed copy of this. So I was out there, and I had been unable to find one. Okay, it wasn't in print. And so Jane Linscole had known that I wanted one, and she said to Roger, she said, she always called me Weber because her first husband's name was David. That was
yes, we can't have that.
Didn't want that association. Yeah. But she said Weber wanted to get a copy of This Immortal, and he couldn't find one. Did you have one around here anywhere? And he said, I might. Let me go look. So he goes away and he comes back, with a sleeved Eaton Press leather-bound presentation copy of the book that he has signed to me. And that is sitting on my shelf as one of my treasured possessions. But Roger Zelazny was sort of the example of what I think an established writer needs to be for people who are not or not yet established writers. Okay. And so, I was going to teach history and write on the side. Okay, that's where I was headed until I found out that over 50% of all tenured history positions were held by people 40 or younger, at which point my priorities kind of changed. But teaching is what I always loved. And if I can find a way to combine my two passions of writing and of explicating and helping somebody else understand how it works and where they need to go, I consider it time really, really well spent on several levels. So if you guys want to have me back, now see, next time you have me back, you'll know you need a bigger club to keep me on focus. Okay.
What's funny is that's normally how our shows go. We start here and we go way over there. Yeah. But when you're here, we went over there, and then we went back over there, and we went over there again. And we're like, where did we go from here? So
now you know why my books are so long.
I was just thinking that. But no, it's been a fantastic show. And yes, we would love to have you back. We're planning on bringing our Thursday night show back, which is kind of a craft discussion show. So maybe that could be a good venue to have you back on. And
we had several people asked if we could make the show today 2 hours, but unfortunately,
pretty much everybody wanted us to broadcast for live. So,
okay.
So we'd love to do that again. So,
David, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been a blast, and everybody that was hanging out with us live, thank you for coming out and hanging out and asking questions and supporting the show. It's been great. Wow.
Just go back, and if you came in late, make sure you go back and see all the spoilers and reveals that.
Yes, we explained how every series ends in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, so
that's right.
Don't miss it. Trust me.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, thanks again for hanging out with us. For Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. We have been live with David Weber for
long time.
The longest episode in history. Make sure you come back and hang out with us next time. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday.